Hey DC foodies! Tired of guessing where to eat next? Meet Tasty, the app that helps you find the best dishes worth ordering using real receipt data instead of star ratings. See where people actually spend their money, what they order, and what it costs before you go. Whether you're looking for date night, lunch, or pizza nearby, Tasty helps you decide. Download Tasty at jointasty.com and scan your first receipt. That's Tasty with an I.
Today on CityCast DC, DC Public Schools is the national leader by a lot in at least one important category, pre-K. Almost every DC 4-year-old goes to pre-K. About 80% of our 3-year-olds do. That is more than twice the national average. My guest, Sara Mead, recently wrote an essay for Capital Commonsense describing this as a DC triumph. She's here to explain how it happened and what it means. Today is Tuesday, August 25th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Sara, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So listen, DCPS went back to school this week, and pre-K starts Thursday. You spend a lot of your time steeped in pre-K, personally and professionally. You just wrote this post for Capital Commonsense about the uniqueness of DCPS's pre-K. It represents a huge triumph from a school system that has not, in recent years, had a whole lot of those. So tell me, what's so special about pre-K in DC? Why is it a triumph?
Sure. Two things I want to say to start out. First, DC really is a unique outlier across the country in terms of the share of our 3- and 4-year-old children who are attending publicly funded pre-K. In most of the country, public education starts at kindergarten, or in some places, not even until first grade. Here in DC, though, it is largely taken for granted that most children will begin their public school experience, whether that's in DCPS, a public charter school, or a community-based program offering free pre-K, that experience will begin when a child is 3 or 4. We have over 90% of our 4-year-olds district-wide attending free public pre-K in the district, and over 80% of 3-year-olds. Just to put this in context, the state with the next highest share of 4-year-olds in pre-K, Vermont, which is one of only 2 states smaller than DC by population, has just a little over 70%. We actually have 20 percentage points more 4-year-olds in pre-K than the next closest state. The other thing I think is really unique and special about pre-K in the district is that it's truly delivered through what early childhood experts call a mixed delivery system.
So where do we deliver that?
That means that parents have multiple options for free public pre-K for their child. They can attend DCPS, or they can enroll in a charter school. Charter schools actually serve the plurality of our pre-K students in the district. And we also have about 1,000 slots district-wide in free public pre-K that's offered by community-based childcare programs. That means for parents whose children enroll those programs, those children may have attended that childcare as an infant and toddler and can continue in free pre-K when they're 3 and 4 years old. So we have a wide variety of options for families in the district for pre-K, and not surprisingly, a large percentage of families use those options.
So this was amazing to me when my kids were first going into school. Just as a matter of budget for our family, we didn't have to spend money on daycare like our friends elsewhere did. And it seemed to, it worked great. The teachers were good. It did that thing when you join your neighborhood school where you sort of suddenly meet huge numbers of people in the community. It was, one of my kids is in college now. So it was relatively new at the time. What was the status quo ante in DC? And when did this universal pre-K where you could by right have your kid in pre-K, when did that start and how?
Sure. So I will say I totally agree on the budget point. My own 3-year-old just started pre-K in a charter school today, and my family definitely recognizes the budgetary impact of that, as do thousands of families district-wide. The history of pre-K in the district is really interesting. The district's leadership in pre-K goes back at least to the 1960s. We were one of the first incubation sites for the Head Start program when it was launched in the 1960s. And DCPS has had pre-K classrooms in some of its public schools since the 1960s as well.
But there was, if I recall, like in the 2000s, in the Adrian Fenty and Vince Gray administrations, there was a major push to vastly expand this.
Yes, that is absolutely true. So a couple different things are true and happened here. So DC has had some form of public pre-K since the 1960s. Those programs expanded in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And actually by 2001, 2002, over 40% of kids age 4 in DCPS were in pre-K. At that point in time, the district had a very new charter sector, so charters weren't a major player in pre-K. But what happened was after the district created charter schools, because DCPS had had pre-K classrooms, when the district created a funding formula for both charter schools and DCPS, charter schools were also able to get pre-K funding, and they were able to enroll pre-K students if it was in their charter, and that fueled a lot of growth in pre-K in charter schools.
So this seems expensive because effectively they have suddenly expanded the public school system by 2 grade years. How do they pay for this? And how did they make this happen?
It's super interesting in DC because we didn't have the same kind of public debate about making a big investment in pre-K up front that you see in a lot of other places, because it is something that happened because pre-K was built into our school funding formula. So it just showed up in increasing and shifting enrollment in DCPS and our public charter schools. The district does spend about $300 million annually on pre-K for children enrolled in DCPS and charter schools. But what actually happened was because that funding is in our school funding formula, that growth occurred organically over time in both the charter sector and DCPS in the early 2000s. And then in 2008, the district passed legislation called the Pre-K for All DC Act. And what that legislation was really designed to do was to create a path for our community-based childcare facilities to also offer free pre-K. Because what happened was that as charter schools and DCPS started serving more 3- and 4-year-olds, childcare facilities really rely on 3- and 4-year-olds to help make their books balance. And as those programs were losing children to DCPS and the public charter schools, that created challenges for them. So early childhood advocates worked with the council to pass the Pre-K for All DC Act, which led to a path for our community-based organizations to serve 3- and 4-year-olds. That legislation also put in place some expectations around reporting and quality in pre-K across the mixed delivery system, and a role for OSSE, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, in overseeing pre-K across all 3 sectors. But by the time that had happened, we already had a very large percentage of our kids served in DCPS and charter schools. And DCPS and charter schools continued to grow access, as did our community-based childcare facilities, up through the next several years. But it is actually quite a long time at this point that the district has had in place essentially universal pre-K now, which is why, your child who is now grown has been able to go to pre-K. Many children have gone all the way through starting in pre-K at this point.
I mean, it was amazing because it was happening as, you were reading stuff about other states talking about moving to 4 days a week school and otherwise. Can you talk a little bit for folks about the nuts and bolts of pre-K? Like who can enroll? How do you enroll? What school are you assigned to? At least in my kids' day, you were guaranteed a pre-K spot, but not necessarily in your neighborhood school.
Sure. So pre-K is a little bit different from K-12 education in the district in that even though it's universal and even though the district as a whole has enough slots for all children, there is not a guarantee that a child will get a pre-K slot somewhere in the district, and there is no requirement for children to attend pre-K. So when a child turns 5, they are required under DC law to be enrolled in public school or in approved private school or homeschooling options. That's not true for 3- and 4-year-olds. So what happens if you want to enroll your 3- or 4-year-old in school in the district? First of all, eligibility is solely based on age. So a child must be 3 before September 30th or on September 30th and not yet 5 in order
They
to
have to be
enroll.
potty trained?
They do not have to be potty trained. The schools strongly encourage that parents focus on potty training their children in advance of pre-K, and the schools don't provide the same level of support for some aspects of toileting for children without disabilities as as you would find in a childcare program. But the schools in general are not supposed to be telling parents you must be potty trained to go, but they will work with you to make sure your child is making progress in an age appropriate and developmentally appropriate way.
Well, so talk about what are they going to learn and absorb? I mean, you hear a lot about the importance of early childhood education, but what do we know about the differences sort of in the abstract between children who go to pre-K versus children who don't?
There's a national body of evidence showing that pre-K has a positive educational impact for children, particularly children from low-income families or children with other disadvantages. One of the things that we know about how children grow and develop and learn is that in the early years, children are developing language incredibly rapidly and are building their knowledge about the world. And many children get lots of experiences that help them build their language and learn things about the world at home through activities they do with their families, their extended families. But for children who may, for various reasons, not be getting that depth of experience at home, having that pre-K opportunity is particularly helpful because they're getting more intensive language support and they're getting more intensive exposure to ideas and knowledge. In terms of what it looks like in a pre-K classroom, it really does look different from a classroom for older children. A lot of the way pre-K age children learn is through play. So you go in a pre-K classroom, you will see a classroom typically organized in what we call centers, which means there will be, one place where maybe the children are playing with blocks and trucks and toys like that. There'll be another place where you might have a toy kitchen and dress-up clothes. There'll be another place where there's art. There's another place where there's a library. And children spend a pretty big chunk of the day in those centers. And when they're in those centers, the teachers are intentionally designing what happens in those centers to reinforce specific things they want the children to be learning. So maybe you're doing a unit on animals and all the different types of animals and where they live and the life cycle of animals. So you might have your dramatic play area set up as a vet shop, and the children are, listening to the stuffed dog's heart. And then, in the book area, you'll have books about dogs. And then often during that time, the teachers are walking around and interacting with the children. And then there are parts of the early childhood day where they are doing whole group instruction, where the teacher might be doing a read aloud with the children, introducing new concepts, introducing new math concepts. But that's a smaller chunk of the day because little kids are not really designed to sit still for long chunks of time, and their attention spans are shorter.
Nor a lot of big kids in my experience.
That's true. So you'll do that whole group instruction. You'll spend time in centers where the kids are really learning through play. And then in a lot of programs, there are also periods of time for small group instruction where a teacher will be interacting with a smaller group of, maybe 3 or 4 children, working with them on specific skills that are aligned with the areas they need to grow in. So maybe those children are starting to learn to identify the first sounds of words, for example, or they're learning how to count numbers on a number line. Those are all activities they might do in a small group. Early childhood classrooms, the way children really learn in those classrooms is through play, but also through interactions with one another and interactions with adults. And so to support that, early childhood classrooms typically have at least 2 adults. So they're having a higher level of adult-child interaction.
Which adds to the budget, too.
It does.
In DC, something is changing. From 2023 to 2024, fatal opioid overdoses dropped by 33%. That's not a statistic. That's somebody's auntie, sister, father, neighbor, friend who is still here. Now, behind that number is a city that decided to fight back. And the DC Department of Behavioral Health is at the center of it, connecting people to prevention, treatment, and recovery services every single day. So whether you're trying to protect someone you love, find a way through your own battle, or simply understand what your community is going through, Know Your Path DC is here for you. Know your worth, know your alternatives, know your value, know yourself. Take it from me when I tell you recovery is possible. It happens every day in this city for real people. Learn more and find resources at knowyourpathdc.com.
This has now been sort of ubiquitous long enough that presumably there's some sort of data that would allow at least conjectures on what this means for DCPS in the long term. Like if most of the high school seniors of today were, in a generation where everyone went to pre-K, what has that led to any practical change that is measurable?
So that's a really hard question to answer.
I can imagine.
In general, universal early childhood programs are really hard to study because when almost all of the children are getting the intervention, you don't have the same kind of comparison group, and children who aren't getting that intervention may have other differences. And in DC, there has not been the same kind of formal research partnership to study what children outcomes are having in pre-K as we've seen in some other jurisdictions. Urban Institute does have an ongoing study of pre-K outcomes, but it was disrupted by the COVID pandemic and hasn't been completed yet. So we don't have that data yet. In addition, DC doesn't have the kind of kindergarten readiness assessment lots of other states have, so we don't have that kind of data to look at what are we seeing in terms of impacts at kindergarten entry. I do want to talk about two things that we do know, though. DC is, and has been for quite a long time, one of the most rapidly improving jurisdictions in the country in terms of student achievement. That predated the pandemic when we were one of the fastest growing states in the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And in the post-pandemic period, we've continued to see improvements in test scores and the students in the district largely making up ground that was lost during COVID. That's data from older students, but we know lots of things have been happening in our public education system that are also contributing to improved outcomes for children, both in DCPS and the charter sector. But I think it's reasonable to believe that pre-K is part of that picture, both because it's helping more of our children start elementary school with a solid grounding of knowledge and skills, and because it's playing a crucial role in helping attract and retain families in the district going into our public education system. In addition to that, we do collect, and the office that I led when I was at DC government, the Office of the State Superintendent of Education's Division of Early Learning, administers observations of quality in pre-K classrooms across the district. So we do have a measure of whether kids are getting the kind of learning experience we want to see. And by and large, we're seeing stronger results in terms of that pre-K quality across all three sectors than you see in comparable observations of early childhood settings across the country. And we have really seen a trend of improvement over time over the past decade in the quality of children's early learning experiences in our pre-K classrooms. So we can be pretty confident that children in early childhood settings across DC that are publicly funded in our pre-K classrooms are getting good early learning experiences. Now, it's important that a good early learning experience is followed by a good elementary and secondary education experience so that children can retain those benefits. But we've made a lot of progress and are providing a good early learning experience for kids. Are there places we can improve? Absolutely. I think quality of curriculum is one area that we've actually seen both DCPS and our charter schools working on to make sure kids are getting pre-K learning experiences that are age appropriate for them, but also really build their knowledge about the world in ways that put them on track for learning. DCPS is moving to a new curriculum that I think is really exciting. And we have a number of our charter schools that use high quality curricula too.
So listen, this year there's been I read 14% overall drop in pre-K applications, particularly at schools in heavily immigrant neighborhoods, schools with bilingual programs. So this has been attributed to sort of the ICE effect, messing with people's comfort, parting with their kids for the day and dropping them off. Are there other ways of reading that data?
I think there's probably a few different things going on that folks should be aware of looking at pre-K enrollment and applications. I think One thing to be clear on is that while children apply for pre-K, there are also pathways for children to enter pre-K and enroll in pre-K after the lottery. And we've seen data over time that a growing share of DC children and families do take that path to enroll in pre-K. And
what I think you're saying is that this 14% drop in applications may not mean there's a 14% drop in the number of pre-K students.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the way it works in pre-K is because children don't have a guarantee at their GCPS school of right for pre-K the same way they do for kindergarten, all families that want to enroll their children in pre-K are supposed to go through the My School DC lottery process, whether they want to go to a DCPS school or a public charter school. The exception there is the families that are in the community-based programs. Those programs have their own processes outside My School DC. But most families are going through the lottery for that. However, after the lottery is over, there are often schools that still have slots available, particularly in some of the undersubscribed DCPS and charter schools. And it is often the case that families will enroll in pre-K after the lottery process through those channels, and those families don't show up in that 14% application. So it's very possible that some families are actually showing up today at their school, going to enroll, and will end up enrolled, but didn't show up in that 14%. Another important thing to keep in mind, so we'll know for sure what the trend in pre-K enrollment is after the enrollment audit, probably in February. The other thing to remember, though, is that DC is going through demographic change. The birth rate in DC peaked in 2016 and our child population has been falling since then with subsequent cohorts. So the population of 3 and 4-year-olds who are age eligible to enroll in pre-K is smaller this year than it was in past years. And we see that across the system.
And this is something of the Doge effect.
I think it's partly that, but also, birth rates fell starting in 2016. So birth rates were already falling before the pandemic. This is a national trend that people are aware of and particularly pronounced in some urban areas. And then DC did experience population loss, particularly for families during the pandemic as well. And we have partially recovered from some of those factors, but the combination of those things does mean we just have fewer kids in the district even before Doge was even on the radar. That also may be affecting families, if they're not working in those roles, maybe choosing to leave the district as well.
Before I let you go, you mentioned you dropped your own child off at pre-K this week.
Yes.
What was it like?
It was exciting, but also hard. My son had been in the same childcare facility, which we absolutely loved since he was 4 months old. And he is going to be attending a public pre-K charter school. We are really excited about the school he's attending, but it's a different place. It's bigger than his childcare facility. It's new for him, new grown-ups, new kids. But kids at this age are just so amazing. He walks into the classroom. He's a little bit anxious, but he looks around. He sees toys he's really excited to play with. He sees other kids. And then by the time my husband and I left after dropping him off, he's just sitting there on the rug playing with toys with another little boy.
I mean, I ask just because, since pre-K, particularly pre-K 3, is such a new thing nationally. Most parents themselves don't have a personal experience of going off to school at 3. And therefore, subjecting your kid to that or treating your kid to that or whatever you may call it feels a little bit unusual to some of us.
I mean, it's interesting. We have a lot of families in the district who've been using childcare since their children were younger than that because, they may be a 2-income couple. They may be a single parent who needs childcare to work. And I do think for families who are using childcare, pre-K is a natural transition and also, as we talked about earlier, in many cases, a big financial benefit. It is harder for families who are going for the first time to school to make that transition if the child's been home with their family. But I think there is a lot of support for families around that. The schools do a lot of outreach. They do a lot of support events to reassure families as children are coming in. And I think the fact that it is sort of taken for granted and so common in DC also helps with the transition. It's not like you're the only family in your friend group, or your child is the only child in their friend group going to school. Most of the kids in their friend group will be going to school, and often the child is going to be going to school with the same group of kids they've been in a childcare with. There's going to be transitions, but they'll probably know somebody. And I also think it helps that we actually do have really high quality pre-K classrooms. It's not like kids are showing up at school and going to sit in a desk and be expected to sit still all day. They're walking into a room that looks a lot like the classroom in their childcare. It's got toys. The teachers are trained in how young children grow and develop. The children eat meals together, family style, at little tables that are their size. They have a lot of outdoor playtime. All of the things that we know are aligned with what 3 and 4-year-olds really need and benefit from to learn are in the pre-K classrooms. And I think having our choice-based system is really beneficial too, because it means that, for example, if a family is a Spanish-speaking family, we have bilingual programs where the child can learn in Spanish and English together at the same time. And we have programs that deliver Montessori models. We have programs that do a lot of different models that parents can pick things that align with their values and what they want for their child. And I think that makes a big difference in helping make sure that families are comfortable with that transition to pre-K, as well as in most cases, families have the option of their neighborhood school.
Last question. We're about to have a new mayor. We're about to have a new DCPS chancellor. You've described the kind of growth and ubiquity of pre-K as a great triumph of DC, but obviously, as with anything, there's issues. What would you like to see from either of those people?
Yeah, I would really love to see the new DCPS chancellor just continue the tremendous progress DCPS has made on instructional quality and high quality curriculum in pre-K, and recognizing that pre-K is part of the district's public education system and is a really fundamental foundation. And even thinking about how do we connect what's happening for kids in pre-K with strong kindergarten and sustain into the early elementary grades. I think that our likely new mayor has positioned herself as a champion for childcare. And I think that that is really exciting and important for families. In the district, childcare is a very important resource for district families. And I think just recognizing that pre-K and childcare work together in a complementary way, both to support families and to put kids on track for later school success, and really thinking about both those things together. It's not an either or, supporting families or helping kids learn. We need to do both those things, both in how we think about childcare and our various ways the district helps families access and afford childcare if they need help, and in sustaining a really high quality pre-K system so that all of our families have that opportunity to benefit from pre-K, and all of our children have the opportunity to get really high quality early learning before they go into kindergarten.
Sara, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.